Good afternoon. My name is Elise Brunelle, and I'm the Managing Director of Cape Town Opera, and we are live from Cape Town. I'm at my home in Hout Bay, just south of Cape Town, and I'm really happy to have some amazing people join today on Cape Town Opera's first webinar. Just a couple of thanks, though. First, before we get into it, a big thank you to our backstage team in marketing of Dian and Leslie and Daniel. And thank you to the sponsors of Amagokra, which are the African Culture Fund, Western Cape Government Department of Cultural Affairs of Sport, University of Cape Town Opera School, and the Rupert Music Foundation. So, Cape Town Opera started the idea of a newly commissioned piece that was to serve as a counterpoint to another one-act opera that the UCT Opera School and Cape Town Opera wanted to do together, which was Benjamin Britten's Curlew River. So that's a church parable and a music drama for an all-male cast. And it made sense for us then to talk about how we could best balance that with something that was local, South African music, South African words, South African story, with an all-female cast. And out of this decision that we made with UCT, we discovered that new operas are often inspired by intense personal relationships on universal ideas. And as we put our team together to create this, the commission that came about ended up titled as Amagokra, or as our librettist Asanda Chuma Sopotela explains it, as Heroes. And it explores the legacy of two South African women, Uyinene, Mrwetyana, and Fezekile, Khwezi, Kuzwayo, who were both tragically lost their lives to gender-based violence. So it's a really tough subject matter, but it's something that we're looking forward to exploring in this new opera. And I'd like to kick off with the first of our three panelists to join us. We've got Chuma Sopotela coming on board from her home in Makanda in the Eastern Cape. Hi, Chuma, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Great. Let me just tell everybody a bit about who you are. You are somebody who I think has just graced the stages in so many places around the world as an actress, as a director, as a performing artist. You've been at National Arts Festival, Vavasati Festival at the State Theatre, Spirit Contemporary. You collaborated with a huge number of amazing South African artists, Tando Doni, Janice Honeyman, Naomi Yonga, Yaku Bauer, amongst others. You're Standard Bank Young Artist of the Year in 2018, Kaka and Ka Best Actress Award, Naledi, Fleur de Cop. I mean, I think the list goes on and on. But our first work with you was last year when you came on board with Cape Town Opera to create a high school opera called Ubizo with the Pandowazi Secondary in Philippi. So we're really, really happy to have you back with us for this new collaboration. And the second person I'd like to bring on board is Sibusiso Njeza, who is our composer. And he's joining us from his home in Glenhaven in Belleville South, just outside of Cape Town. Hi, Sibusiso.
Hi, Elise. Hi, Elise.
So I think everyone knows you as the specialist in African choral music. When you say African choral music, your name is on the top of every list. You have been with UWC Creative Arts Choir since I think about 2011, and have brought that choir incredible accolades, winning at the World Choir Games just about 2 years ago. You've also worked on the NAC Advisory Board. You've been music teacher at Simon Estes. You have won multiple awards, Best Conductor Award at Old Mutual, Choir Festival with Whitma, Best Composer Award, and also an incredible composer with numerous choral works and operas already. So Amagokra, I think, is going to be your third. First being the Madiba the Opera that you wrote, and then also the Blood of Mine back in 2015. So we're really excited to have you join us on this, which will be your third opera collaboration.
Thank you for having
me. And the last panelist I'd like to bring on board is Jeremy Silver. And he's going to be joining us from his home at Townhouse in Newlands, just outside of Cape Town. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hello, thank you.
Great. For those of you who don't know Jeremy, he is the director of the opera school at the University of Cape Town. And he originally is from the UK, but his connection with South Africa came through his wife, soprano Sally Silver, who is South African, but also through many, many years being conducting and helping and coaching, leading the Melting Pot Choir Festival in South Africa, as well as directing, I think, all the major orchestras here in South Africa. And you've also worked with Cape Town Opera, conducting most recently I Capuletti e Montecchi, but also going back to about 2014, I think, of Figaro with us, and many, many other collaborations around the world. So welcome to our webinar, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
Great. All right. I'd really love to kick off this with a couple of key questions. We're going to just talk a whole bunch about what it means to create a South African opera, and specifically this one. And if people would like to have live comments, we're going to check in on those and can answer them as the webinar continues. So I want to start out with two things. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. Why new opera? Just talk to us a bit about why it's important, especially for students of opera, to learn and perform new ones. And how do you feel that the ones here in South Africa will best make use of learning Amagokra and what it teaches them over the course of their career as singers?
I think there are two very pertinent reasons why we must be doing new opera. One is obviously that UCT Opera School is a very major part of South African opera ecology, as it were. So the performances that we're involved with are a large part of what is on offer. And therefore, to keep the art form alive, we need to be commissioning regularly. And the interesting thing is, obviously, as you said, I'm from the UK. I see at the moment, in fact, more than ever that I can remember, a huge resurgence in new creation, new works being written there, in Europe, in America. It seems that opera has become the great multimedia art form, or has been recognized as it anyhow. I mean, because of course it's the same art form it always was. The Wagner called Gesamtkunstwerk, of course, which meant basically multimedia. But I think from a more specific point of view, it's important that our students get to grips with new work because there are a whole lot of skills, I guess, in performing a new work that they don't necessarily have to approach with older work. And I'm thinking mostly in terms of musical language. People are very, very comfortable with 17th, 18th, 19th century musical language. As soon as we get to the 20th century and beyond, somehow there's less unanimity in musical language around the world. Its sort of style has exploded. And if we're not careful, our singers do not have the tools to deal with all these different styles. But because, of course, there's a huge explosion of new work around the world, they need to be able to do it in order to have international careers, which is, of course, the Holy Grail, is what they're all after. They want to work here, but they also want to work internationally, which is more or less true of every opera singer, I think, in the world. It's a necessity. Very few make a living in their own country alone. So it's those two strands, I think, which is important. But contributing to the new canon of work here has to be vital.
Great, thank you for that. I think that sets the tone for why. Why do we even commission? What's important behind that within the art form of opera? Chuma, I'd like to go to you and ask you if you could describe the process you underwent to come up with the subject matter in the first place, the storyline in the first place. Why is this important for you to tell? And what should the young performers and the audience take away from this? How did you get to the storyline that we've ended with? And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what that storyline is.
Well, most of my work deals with gender and specifically gender violence. As a Black woman, it is quite hard to not make work about such issues. as they've become sort of part of the fabric, unfortunately, of our lives. And when I came across this project, I was already doing another piece called Uwayo Unqanda Balwayo, which was a performance artwork about the violence of rape, which was inspired by Pumla Gola's book on rape. So it was quite clear for me then that the next step was to almost make the multiple of that work. And Amagokra then became sort of like a celebration of the spirits of the women who are not entirely still alive in body, but obviously their spirits are still with us, of who are victims of our society and the inequalities of our society. The process of making the work, I first dealt with five, I think, stories of women, and from that we then toned it down to two, because I then realized that in opera you need to give it time, because things do take a lot of time, because people have to sing their script rather than say it, which is what I'm very, very used to. And I'm very much of a physical performer myself. So there was that kind of a challenge that I had. So I had to tone the stories from five women to two. Interestingly enough, for me, in the five women, I chose more international. So I had Princess Diana as part of those women, because it was not only for me about violence, but the interesting the interesting aspects of power in society, and how women are so disempowered, and how we choose to accept information was also interesting for me. So there was this interest on the issues of women and how women are in society. But I was also interested in how we as society have become a society that takes in information, and how we deal with the information that we take, and how we make up stories. I was interested also in how we are choosing to tell the narrative of our lives. I believe that as a society, we will be remembered as a generation for the things we took part in, the things we considered important, and the things we consider not to be as important. So I was interested in what is the narrative that we as a society are choosing to tell when it comes to women's stories. So interestingly enough, our director, she said to me, I remember in a discussion we decided we don't need to be international, because, and being international, I mean having Princess Diana's story in there, because if we tell the story of Uyinene, it does become international, but it becomes very local and special to us. And in that way we can speak of ourselves, which and about ourselves, which is what the issue that we know the most and are very good at, and we know because it's in the fabric of our society, and teach other people about ourselves, and then they can reflect themselves upon the story that we tell. So that was a very interesting turn point, and something that I learned from telling and writing this story. And I think that in telling the stories of Uyinene and Khwezi, I took it upon to also go beyond telling the story of what happened, but to reimagine if we were to have one of them to come back and take us into account about how we have chosen to treat or to tell the story of and be part of the story of their lives, and how they became then victims of our now society. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, and it's always very interesting to think about how we interpret the real life story based on the headlines that we either chose to read or ignored, or the articles we read or didn't. And we walk away years later thinking, remember Khwezi? And we'll remember a few sound bites, but what I find very interesting, and let's get into this maybe a bit later, is you've chosen not only to talk about their stories, but how other women interpret their stories. So it was very much within the context of not just media, but really how do other women talk about these women? How do they treat these women? And I think that's a particularly interesting voice that you've chosen, without giving away everything within this piece. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, the context of the other women in this opera, not the two main ones, but the other women. What are they saying? How is that? How are you motivated by that?
So the story of Khwezi was quite obviously it was about the trial of our ex-president Jacob Zuma, and I found the material online of how people responded to the trial, and this says a lot, which the media doesn't hide, about how we choose, as you say, to speak of women to women about women. And how in that particular story people chose to go with the story of the president. Many women are silenced because of the issues of power, depending on who the society sort of fears the most, who sort of has the most following, who puts more risk to our lives, I guess. And I think that is how we are choosing to survive. And it is not entirely about where the truth is, but we are choosing to save our own skin. And as unfortunately, we are choosing that in opposition of many women who then suffer because of our choices. And I wonder then where we see ourselves in the future. Do we then see our future only as male? Becomes my question, which becomes one of the lines that my character say in the play. She says, my work here is done, but I do hope to come back, but as a different gender. Because it has become clear that women we are choosing against women when it comes to issues of protecting ourselves, I guess, from power. And unfortunately, most of these stories they are have a lot of influence of politics. Many stories of many presidents from everywhere in the world. There are stories of women who were disregarded and who were unheard because we chose to be safe, and we chose our sort of leaders who unfortunately are mostly men. So this becomes the story of our lives. And the as you say, the unfortunate part becomes that us as women then also start to follow and not to see ourselves, because we are not used to hearing the power behind our voices. And I think this is an very important part, that as soon as a woman speaks about her truth, we do not realize or we do not hear the power behind that voice, because our ears are used to hearing only men in power. And then I think this is what disables our society in how we see women, how we hear women, and the function of women in society that we seem not to understand or grapple with. And unfortunately is always undermined and is always under the power of a man. It seems that we have no existence unless there is a presence of men or a man in our lives. Very few women, I don't say there aren't women in power, but there's very seldom that women get to go beyond this glance or this almost filter that we have as a society in hearing women's voices.
Thank you for that. Let me take some of what you're saying has got to resonate, has got to filter, has got to have a strong input on the musical composition, because obviously your experience as a woman, as a South African, and with these stories is the bread and butter behind the words that you're writing. Sibusiso, I'd like you, if you could pick this up more on a musical level now. Can you describe a bit of the process of matching the characters and this storyline to write in the music for this particular opera? How did you do that? How are you doing that? And even getting down to the details of orchestration. It's jumping a bit, but maybe you can talk to us a bit about that.
Yes. I was born in the Eastern Cape, and I feel so blessed to have been born in an area where there's a lot of music, not classical music, because I was born in rural areas in a place called Tsendane. There's a lot of singing in traditional events, where you would find different songs for different things. There will be songs for men, there will be songs for boys, there will be songs for women, for girls. So there's a song for everything that is being done. So growing up in that musically rich context, it becomes natural to know that music can be used to express certain emotions. If I think back in terms of these kind of events that I've been to growing up in my village, I don't remember a single time where a woman had a right to stand and speak in most of these events. But most of the time, you would hear what they're going through. In fact, I only learned that now that I'm old and curious. Back then, I didn't know what was happening. Everything that they wanted to, the messages they wanted to pass, it would be in the form of music. They would sing and beat a particular drum called ingqongqo, where they would actually pass these messages through their music, because I believe back then they didn't have a platform. And in fact, even now in some places, they still don't have a voice. So with that background, I grew up hearing a lot of music in my head, more especially when I would be going through different emotions. When I'm sad, I would be taken out of it by the music I would be hearing in my head. When I was young, I didn't know exactly what was happening until I was in standard 9, which is grade 11, where I had a friend that I used to talk to who sang in the same choir. And he made me realize that what the voices I was hearing in my head could actually be the gift to compose music. And at that time, the reason why we spoke about it is because at that time, it was becoming too much, to an extent that I would have migraines, which I didn't realize where they were coming from. And then at the time, I didn't know how to write music. So when he told me that you have to write what you're hearing, I had no idea. So we used to sit together and I would sing these lines and then we tried to write it down. And so from there, I then had to learn to write music. And that was in tonic solfa, which we used in the choir. And then from there, I passed my matric. Then I went to university. That's when I registered for a music degree. So I wasn't able to do anything until I was at university. So this ability to hear music has always been there. So when I receive a libretto, I will always first read it, understand the story, engage the author of the story, just to have an understanding of what they want to achieve with the story. You know, try and understand the characters. And if I'm confused with anything, I will always go back. Like in the case of Amagokra, we had a lot of back and forth with Chuma, and I'm glad she's the kind of artist that she is, because she's so open. So I had to ask a lot of questions, you know, try to understand the story. More so that the story is a woman's story. It's a story about women. I didn't want to really put my own thoughts into the story, because I don't know how women feel about the subject and what they want to say. So I had to really interrogate Kuma in so many ways such that I get to understand. So when I understood the story, this is when now I got to understand even the characters. And then from understanding the characters, I get to a point where I imagine them. I see them as real people. And it gets to a point where I can even feel what they are feeling without imposing my own thoughts and feelings. So this is the beginning now of the process of putting music into the story. And as this process happens, I really have to listen, you know, closely, because before I went to university, I had no exposure to instrumental music, except when I would listen to a CD or a tape recorder, a cassette of whatever we were singing in the choir. Sometimes it would come with orchestration, but because I didn't know what kind of instruments that were playing there, I would only listen to voices. So it was only after the university period that I began to hear the musical instruments, because I had studied some of those instruments, not necessarily playing, but maybe in music theory, where we would study some string quartets, and then you have to listen in an oral class. So the process now would start with the voices, because that's where I am comfortable at, and that's where the story is. So the story would now play in my head, and then I would start writing the music. From there, I still have to listen again, you know, to the instruments that are coming through. And I must say that background of growing up where there's music, I think actually it helps me a lot, because I don't really find it strenuous to hear these instruments, even instruments that I don't know how they are notated, because some of these instruments are transposing, and I'm not a player of those instruments. So this is when now I have to draw back to the knowledge I gained at university. And coming to Amagokra, it was particularly challenging because the instrumentation was given. Like you said when you were introducing, that this was a supplementary work to a particular work by Benjamin Britten. And the orchestration there is what Benjamin Britten decided on. And I don't write anything close to Benjamin Britten, because I don't hear his music. So I had to go through a process of looking at the instruments and trying to incorporate them into the music that I was writing. And I did that right at the beginning.
I just want to interrupt you, because I think that it's only also 7 or 8 instruments. Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. Flute, horn. It's a small orchestra.
Viola, double bass.
Yeah, viola, cello, and double bass. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you added one, in fact, didn't you, in the end?
Yeah. So it's only 8 instruments, which is really limiting. But fortunately, in the recent years, I've been working with. When I started working with Michael Blake, the composer, back when I was at university. In the recent years, we've been having some composition master classes where we try out new combinations of instruments that we've never written for, before. 2 years ago, a few years ago, we wrote for a Japanese group. It's a duo with a harp and a violin. That is one combination I've never used before. But since then, I learned that this can happen. Last year, we were working with the Fitzwilliam String Quartet from Sweden. And that, again, it's a strange combination for me because I'm not used to saxophone music. So those workshops came in handy now that I had to sort of play around an unusual combination of instruments. And lastly, because this music is written in my own mother tongue, in isiXhosa, and when I spoke to Chuma, she spoke about all these women as ordinary women. Immediately when she told me that, I went back to my village and I saw the women that I know that are there in my village. And immediately when that happened, the rhythms that I'm used to back in my village came through. And unfortunately, there was a lot of percussion that I was hearing, but unfortunately, there is no percussion in those instruments. So I had to use, for instance, an instrument like double bass in pizzicato just to get a drumming feel, because it's not there in the music in the list of instruments. So that's in a nutshell the process that I went through to compose the music to this wonderful story by Chuma.
Thank you for that. And imagine if Britain had written for the Uhadi, that would have made it a bit easier for you, I think. Very interesting. And Jeremy, you're somebody who has worked for years with teaching and training young singers. And I would love to know your thoughts about what Sibusiso is doing in terms of vocal lines, creating a vocal line for a character or using a particular instrument to reflect a character. What is the process that these young UCT and Cape Town Opera young artists are going to be going through to identify and learn new music? Not something they've been listening to on YouTube since they were young. This is brand new. This is new orchestration. How do they learn it? What goes through their mind? And how would Sibusiso be involved in that? Or does he write it and it's done?
Gosh, a whole variety of things to think about. Straight away, I'll say yes, Sibusiso should be involved when they've got something to offer him. So, they should learn a certain amount, and then certainly contact with the composer is always absolutely vital. But the interesting thing about Sibusiso's process of having to really get inside the characters before he could write reminds me of something that the great Italian conductor Carlo Maria Giulini said several decades ago now, when he was asked how he learns a piece, whether it's a new piece or just a piece of Verdi he didn't yet know. And you're thinking in terms of a score with masses of orchestral lines and chorus and many characters, and you're looking at this thinking, how does a conductor learn all that stuff and put it all together? And his answer was, I make friends with the characters first, and then everything that I see on this page falls into place. So I think in many ways, I find the UCT singers, like singers all over the world really, first and foremost, they want to sing. They pick up a piece of music and they're already singing something. And my huge plea to them on a daily basis is, singing is in some ways the last thing you do. Let's just take some time to grasp what's on this page. Let's look at musical style. Let's really look at text. And of course, they are very used to performing opera in languages which are not their own language. So it's a great privilege for many of them who may be isiXhosa speakers to be able to perform in their mother tongue for the first time. But in principle, the idea that they should sing syllables they don't understand is the long way round. They think they're being quick by singing immediately, but they're putting off the process of really deep understanding. So I guess, what we're already doing, and we started doing before lockdown, obviously we've been slightly interrupted, was to get to grips with story and with character first. After that, musical things fall into place. I mean, the UCT singers particularly are very instinctive singers, and it won't take them long to learn. I hope. I hope I'm not too hopeful, but I think it will not take them long to absorb this music. But music can express so many different things. If they haven't done that groundwork first, it's a bit sterile, to be honest. So that would be the process. And yes, Sibusiso, as soon as we can all get together, let's do it. And I'm sure you'll have many different ways of orientating them, expression-wise.
Let me ask you three a question. A number of months ago, when we first commissioned the piece and put this team together, we were really thrilled that Christine Krause could come on board as the director of the piece, which we had hoped to do in May, and now we're going to push it off a bit later to be able to have the time and space to put it on post-COVID. So my question is, sitting together with Christine, also sitting with Matthew Wild, our artistic director, trying to create this piece, because Chuma, you are a multi-talented artist, but this is your first opera commission. Sibusiso, you've written 2 operas, but you are very firmly grounded in choral compositions. What is it that the director brought to your conversations that helped influence where you headed with the libretto, with the composition? How was her commentary and her experience? How did that affect you?
I think that the questions that we had to, because we were coming closer and closer to the time of having to submit the script, and she kept on asking, "How do you see it?" Everyone was asking, "So how do you see it?" And it was a very difficult. It was very difficult for me to answer. And I think this is because for the first time that I hadn't the vision of how this would be played. I didn't see it in my head, but I think I was still very much overwhelmed by the multitude of the story. But what we did agree on was the use of multimedia, and I think that her excitement fed onto my excitement about having projections used in the show. And I think that conversation of having her to sort of get excited from the writing, and also as a director, when like it's the first time I'm writing an opera, and for her to say it's like a nod. It's like, this is a good story and this is an important story, and having her to also reflect upon being a woman herself and how this story is bringing upon different thoughts and stories about the times that these stories had taken place. And for me, that was one of the most important things when I wrote the story, is that I believe, for me, when I make a performance, that I do some of the work as a performer when I'm performing, and a director when I direct, and now as a writer when I write. But there is work to be done by the audience and by the people that you tell the story to. And so for me, the first audience was the people sitting around the table. And Matthew Wild and the director was also part of that audience. And when the first audience says to me, "I remember the time that Princess Diana died, I was sitting next to a window looking out." Now, for me, that is the magic of theater and the magic of storytelling that takes people back to where they were and to reflect on the time. So it was very important to have her around so that I could hear her input. Sort of for me, the very first glance into what the audience is going to be taken through the journey when they sit and they listen to the story.
Yeah, with me, working with two experienced directors was such a privilege, because in my opera Blood of Mine, it was only after the opera was written that I got to interact a bit with the director, Marcus Desando, but not during the process of writing, of which this time around it happened very early. Before we even had a story, we knew who was going to direct. We had a meeting, and we shared some thoughts. So one of the most important things that stood out was finding a story, a coherent story. That's one. Secondly, it was how that story will progress, how will it be narrated, and finding that strand that is going to tie it all together. And then when we did that, we had to look for the dramatic feel within the story, because this is an opera. We have to have some drama happening because it's an opera. So all of those lessons actually guided me, and it actually guided the conversations we had, myself and Chuma, afterwards. Because I remember one time we had to sit at UCT the whole day, actually, to find this and make it work. Because at the time, I was also struggling to understand the characters. Some of them were faceless, that's what I said, and I couldn't really see them, even though the story was there with the text that they were supposed to say. So until we made these real people, and that was with the help of Christine in particular. She sat there with us, and we went through the story, and eventually, when we emerged from there, the libretto was complete. And I mean, we never went back, to change anything. It was complete from that moment, and she was central in making it happen. So that's how it really assisted with the story.
I mean, I think that as artists, you have this desire to tell so much in a piece, especially as you're coming from an acting side where there frankly is more time to say more words, and you want to be so total in the narrative, and you really want to encapsulate everything, and suddenly you're given these restrictions: half an hour, 8 instruments. How do you stay true to yourself as an artist within these restrictions? It's a big challenge. It's really tough, and I think the role of a director, and especially someone who's directed so many pieces, to help guide the music and the words within those restrictions, is just key. It's really important.
Yeah. I remember Matthew saying the first time he read this, the first time he sat around the table with us, and he said 5 stories. And he said, "How long is this opera supposed to be?" And he was like, "I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to cut. There's too much already." I mean, it was great to hear when you've written too much. I mean, it was like, okay, good work, but it was very tough to see the other stories go. But it was also from that experience that we realized the value of what we already had. And Matthew Wild was very part of that process. It was hard to hear. And I remember you and this Mrs. We stayed behind, and I was like, "Hi, I'm sure I can tweak here and there. We can still have all the 5 stories." And I think I didn't email you for a while, like for a couple of days. And I was thinking, oh man, I can still save it. No, let's wait. I can still make it work. But at the end, I had to, yeah, I understood. I understood. I understood. Yeah.
Jeremy, I wouldn't mind asking you in terms of conducting pieces, have you had experience with conducting new works? I mean, this is outside of South Africa or within, in which you thought that was a fabulous new piece of music. It's very tough to have an opera commissioned and get to a stage at all. That's very hard to do, to finance, to find the right team to get it produced, and then to be fortunate enough to be conducting an opening night of a new piece is a wonderful experience. Is there an experience that you can share with us on that front, or even just within a choral world as well, if it's not an opera?
No, I've worked on several new operas, quite small scale ones in more recent years, and I guess that's actually a sign of budgetary constraints in the UK. But before that, when I was on the staff of English National Opera, I was involved with quite a few very large-scale new pieces, which had taken years, obviously, to come to fruition, and were for the entire, huge grand opera forces. And we quite often workshopped them many, many times as we went through, so there would be a reading with not necessarily the final cast, but the people from within the company, and a whole load of input from dramatic people, musical people, the singers themselves, about what's working not only dramatically, but even vocally. And even then, once we got into rehearsals, quite often there'd just be a sense of, this isn't quite working. If we just did this, or if we just took those few bars out of there, or if we did, it might work, and we'd have to consult the director and composer, of course. They would often not be happy with the suggestions, and sometimes we would adopt them, and because they would say, okay, no, I see the point, sometimes not. But it was always a very, very long collaborative process. The smaller ones I did, I guess I spent a lot of time at composers' houses beforehand, talking through stuff, sitting around the piano. I don't think it's possible to write in isolation. I suspect Bach was able to write in isolation. I think nowadays it's not such an easy task. And so that's what we always did, and which is why it's been so wonderful. We've had these long meetings, as Sibusiso said, right? Sitting at UCT for whole days, because it's a chance all to be of one mind, which I think is ultimately also what's the most important thing. Once we actually come to put this thing on, if we are all coming at it from the same perspective, it will work well. If we're all pulling apart because we haven't had those discussions, then it would, I think, be very difficult for all of us. So, yeah, it's an interesting and always a bit of an inspiring thing to be part of a new creation.
I mean, especially very thinking about the practicalities of, you said it in the beginning, of writing for a voice, making sure that the notes are going to be singable for the voice that you're writing for, that there is enough dramatic tension, that there's actually a climax. It is a story. Operas are stories. So we have to have that storyline that keeps the audience interested all the way to the end. And as you say, really no one can do that by themselves, nor should they. So it is that ongoing collaboration that is just key to the creation of any opera. Speaking of any opera, I have a question for you all. There's been quite a number of operas that have been written in South Africa, and a number of them have been about women. There's Winnie by Bongani Ndondana Breen. There was Sarki by Hendrik Hofmeyr, Words from a Broken String by Peter Klatzo, amongst others. My question is, who else should we be writing about? Who would be the next? And it doesn't have to be South Africa. It could be broader than that. Are there any other people's, and maybe specifically women's stories that just you think, when I think about that person or that group or that revolution, there should be an opera about it? Any ideas?
Well, one of the stories that didn't make it to this one is about the 200 Nigerian girls that disappeared,
The
which
Boko
for
Haram.
me is a time in history that will haunt us, because it can't be that 200 women disappear and then we sort of move on the next day after doing a big campaign where all women from all over the world went onto the platforms and said, bring back our girls. And then years later, we forget about it. A day later, in fact, I think Nicki Minaj had an impact, and then we forgot about the 200 girls. So I think that that story
Hmm.
of those girls is one that I would like to see, especially because, as an opera, because of the magnitude. It's a lot. It's a number. It's a big number. And I think that as an opera, that for me would be like a dream. To
Hmm.
imagine what they went through, to imagine the story they would tell, the questions that they would ask us. Would they
Hmm.
thank us for the campaign that we did? And would they want to know what we think of them now, or even if we do think of them now? Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think in most cases we tend to write about prominent women, or especially politicians, people who are well known, and we forget about, you know, ordinary women out there. I believe there are stories of strong ordinary women in every corner of this country. If we look at South Africa, whose stories are not told and whose stories are actually building this nation. So I think those that have the ability to write stories, because unfortunately I can't, or maybe I haven't, maybe let me not say I can't, I haven't. Maybe if we can have some of those stories, then we'll begin to appreciate those women. Some are found in townships, some are found in villages. I remember in back in March, we were we were in the funeral of my sister Nolufe FM Chabe, whom I dedicated the score of this opera to, in Tomo, Eastern Cape. I looked around at the people of her village when everybody was speaking about her on the podium. I realized that they had no idea who she was, what she could do. Even some of us, we only learned there the amount of work that she did, which we had no idea of. We knew her as a choir director, just an ordinary woman who loved people. But beyond that, we had no idea how many people who referenced their success from the help that she provided. And she was not the one person who would go out and say, I helped that one, and I helped that one, and that one as well. And how she took on so many people into her small house to grow there. So those kind of women, I believe we need to really pay attention to, and 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 expose those kind of stories, so that everybody knows that they exist and they are contributing in building this country.
Yeah, I think everyone has had either 2 minutes or 20 years with Nolufefe. She was such an integral part of everyone's lives, whether they knew it or not, in South Africa and the choral scene. I'm so thrilled to know that you've acknowledged her in this piece. Jeremy?
Obviously, it's so important to find examples of real women who need to be written about, spoken about. But actually, the general issues, I guess, of women's stories around the world, can be very similar. And I'm reminded of something that the great novelist Iris Murdoch said, which was, to paraphrase, that the more specific you can be in your writing and the more real you can be, the more universal you become. And I suspect that just telling specific stories of people who are not well known, but making it as real and as profound as possible will tell a universal story which will resonate absolutely around the world. So that I think is important. It's the great thing about our art form, that we can touch people without literally talking about the people they know. That people somehow extrapolate stories and get universal messages.
Great. We've gotten a couple of comments from some of our people watching in from Veta Y. She says she's listening with great interest from the UK, really interesting and inspiring perspectives from all of you. How great do you listen to this collaboration with UCT and Cape Town Opera? Nonganar Chorus says now she's very interested in reading the script of Amagokra. Christine Bam, loving the loaded questions and loving the responses. Nancy Richards, love the idea of ordinary women's voices being the highlight. So thanks very much for the comments. Before we close out this first webinar, any parting words, Sibusiso? Anything from your side?
It is just to ask people to stay safe, because it's not safe out there. People must just take precautions and be safe from COVID-19. And I hope to see people when we are able to go back to theaters and concerts, and I hope to see everyone out there. Stay safe.
Thank you. Jeremy?
I mean, the stay safe message, of course, is from all our hearts. It's very important. But I also hope and look forward to a day when we will be able to put this opera on, and I hope to see many people there experiencing it with us. It's going to be an important piece, and people I think will really get something very profound from it.
Thank you. And Chuma?
Yeah, I would like to say that to fellow artists, I mean, everyone stay safe. But I would like for us to keep in our prayers and our thoughts many artists who have gone without work at this time, because we work with concerts, as you said, and with people gathering. We don't know when that will happen again. So please keep in our thoughts and our prayers all the artists who are without work. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Thank you to all three of you for joining us for this webinar. And I can't wait until we can make that public announcement when we get to put Amagokra on stage with Curly River, Cape Town Opera, and the University of Cape Town College of Music Opera School. Thanks everybody for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.